watching an Infowars.com special report. The stock market has tanked more than 500 additional points today, a total of 519 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, on news that the Federal Reserve will keep interest rates at zero or below for the next 2 years. There are riots and demonstrations taking place across the world, from Israel to England, and a massive increase in crime here in the United States. Joining us to break down exactly what this means and what's coming in the short and long-term future is Max Keiser of MaxKeiser.com. He is a former stock trader and, of course, the inventor of the virtual trading system, the Hollywood Stock Exchange. And he joins us because he's predicted with great precision much of what has now unfolded. Max Keiser joining us from Paris. Thanks for being with us.
Sure, Alex. Anytime. Great to be here.
Well, my friend, break down what we're seeing in the markets right now, what's happening with Bank of America, other bank stocks, and what this signifies to have the Fed announcing that interest rates will be held where they are for the next 2 years.
Well, you mentioned the Fed talking about keeping interest rates near zero for another 2 years, and talking actually about alternative ways to juice the economy, monetarily speaking, which includes such things as negative interest rates we can get to in a second. But this whole giving way, monetary easing, typically markets would go up on that news. And as you see, markets are going down on that news. It's just because after 20 years, 25 years of creating this massive Ponzi scheme of cheap money and creating a GDP in America that's tied to the banking system, that's tied to cheap money, finally, in the last couple of years, that's no longer working. So no matter how cheap they make the money, it hit a saturation point a couple of years ago, and it's just falling apart. So there is no amount of cheap money at this point that will stimulate the economy. It's like kicking a dead horse, literally. The economy is dead. The model that has sustained it for 25 years is finished. And all the policymakers are doing is trying to resuscitate the economy using the same tricks they've used for 20 years, and it's not working. And as a result, you've got this enormous disconnect where the message coming out of the Federal Reserve and from Washington is that we just need more stimulus and everything will be fine around the corner. And meanwhile, the economy is crashing, unemployment is rising, social unrest is rising, you've got riots all over the world, and they don't seem to make the connection that maybe what they're doing is completely wrong.
Or maybe they have made the connection, and that's why in Europe, the United States, the UK, the social engineers, as soon as they got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act back in the late 1990s, began setting up a very oppressive, authoritarian police state. In the last decade, they've used the threat of the manufactured war on terror as the excuse to build that max. But now they're basically admitting that the whole apparatus is for the people themselves. Do you think that the system will be successful in being able to suppress revolution?
Well, okay, so you can take the point of view that this is a planned, controlled economic demolition, and the result is a return really to an economic model that you could call feudalism, really, because all the wealth is concentrated in the upper 1/10 of 1%, and everyone else is essentially an indentured servant, especially if they bring in these negative interest rates, which guarantee being an indentured servant from birth. So yes, it's easy to say that this is the agenda of the banks because it's the easiest way to make money, and they've been very successful without anybody stopping them from putting this in place. Is it going to be successful in keeping down the global insurrection against banker occupation, as I call it? I think that this is the war, and now it's on. You know, we've been talking about it coming for a number of years, and clearly it's here. And it's here, obviously, in North Africa and the Middle East. It's in Europe. It's in Athens. It's in Dublin. And now it's hit London in a way that has caught everyone up by surprise, really, because it's spread very, very quickly, and it's very violent, and it seems completely anarchistic. And yet, if you look at this at a more of a broader historical and global perspective, you can see that this is part and parcel of this tension that exists between the bankers who are stealing wealth on a minute-by-minute basis and getting better and better at it, and nobody's stopping them, and the rest of the world population, which is being disenfranchised, bankrupted, and thrown under the bus. And this is causing this conflict and erupting in different countries in different ways.
Max, if you had to choose one geographic area in the world where more of the banksters, the oligarchs, the Ponzi scheme operators are based, wouldn't it be the city of London, within London? And after you give us the answer, describe for folks what the city of London within the city is.
Right, absolutely. The City of London has been the global center for the global hedge fund community because they're very lax in their regulatory environment for banks and hedge funds. And as a result, they attract the hedge funds. They also attract many of these oligarchs that are fleeing their countries. For example, the Icelandic bankers who stole billions, they took up residency in London. And they give them safe harbor. As a result, in a perverse way, the real estate in London is out of reach for the average person because of the price appreciation due to the inclusion now in the arrival of all these oligarchs from Iceland or from Russia, different territories around the world where they have been able to totally co-opt the system, confiscate wealth. But London is definitely the center of the global arbitrage and the global money laundering business as well. And as a result, it attracts all sorts of these kleptocrats and oligarchs. And the City of London, which is their quote unquote Wall Street, it's a principality within London. And it fits amongst these other, there's a couple of other territories in the world. I believe Washington, D.C. is one of them, and so is the Vatican. These are three centers of it's its own sovereign, if you will, and they have their own government, and they kind of communicate with each other. It's part of the ability of the elite to communicate with each other completely outside of any sovereign that is reportable to the public. It's a private sovereignty. And obviously with the Queen and the monarchy also nearby, there's a lot of communication there as well. There's a lot of wealth that's being controlled. Remember, Gordon Brown last year talked about the shadow banking system. This is a $14 trillion banking facility that's completely outside of the normal channels of the banking system, has completely unregulated, it's completely non-visible, non-transparent. And this is where many of the stock deals go down and where a lot of the inside information is capitalized on before becoming public, because it's done completely out of view of the public. And this shadow banking system is tied into the global derivatives business, the credit default swaps, for example, that are destroying Greece, the credit default swaps that destroyed Ireland, the credit default swaps that are now destroying America. You know, when the S&P rating agency downgraded the U.S. from AAA to AA+, suddenly there's huge volatility and there's huge trading activity from the vultures who are now swooping in with credit default swaps and effectively attacking America with the financial weapons. And this is part of the collapse of the U.S. These guys have no sovereignty of their own. They're simply marauding rogue financial bankers or financial terrorists, and they go wherever they can make the most money. And
well, that was my next question, and it's these very groups, these six big mega banks that are always pushing a global corporate government that we pay our VAT taxes to. They're not content now to just buy off our politicians in Europe, England, the United States. Now they want open world government, but at the same time, the laws of nature, the laws of history show that they can't really be above the law forever, especially if they totally decimate their host nations. I mean, even here in the U.S., some municipalities are having to lay off 60, 70% of their police. At a certain point, they're destroying any markets for them to even operate in. I mean, I understand they're a parasitic system feeding on the real market in the real world, but it seems that they think they can just go on forever. Max, do you believe that they've bitten off more than they can chew?
Well, let's take a look at what's going on in Europe, for example. A couple of weeks ago, and for the last couple of years, there's been this ongoing crisis in Europe. Now, what happened last week is that the European Central Bank, principally coming out of Berlin, they're putting together this new European-wide credit facility, a multi-trillion-dollar facility, which allows them to repackage all the bad debt in Greece and Ireland, roll it up, to this European-wide credit facility and deal with it over a period of time, kicking the can down the road. The downside is that countries like Greece and Ireland lose their sovereignty. Now, if you look at the global scale, what I've been talking about on your show for a couple of years, and other guests on your show have made the same comment, is that globally, this type of approach to solving the toxic debt problem will be applied, and we'll see the emergence of a global central bank. In Davos last year, it was remarked that they need a $100 trillion credit facility. Why would they need that? Because they're going to take all the debts of America and Europe and South America and repackage them in a new global credit facility, probably the new global currency, a variation on the Bancor or the SDR, and repackage and resecuritize, roll that all up to the new global banking central bank system. And they'll do this in the name of preserving liquidity and preserving markets and keeping people's purchasing power intact. But the end result will be all the nations participating will have lost their sovereignty. They'll be answering to a global institution. And of course, that is not something that people who are born into America sign up for, to lose their sovereignty.
Well, that was my next point, is this is a perfect plan for global financial domination. The countries are signed on to the too big to fail, and then the nations lose their sovereignty because they've bailed out the banks, but then the mega banks are the bosses over you and order you to cut all of your basic services so that more money can be paid into them when they've created the fraudulent system. So briefly here, how do we reverse this? What are ideas or programs, Max, that you think would be a good way to extricate ourselves out of the finance oligarchs' global system? I mean, one thing would obviously be to get rid of the Federal Reserve here domestically, and in other countries, get rid of the same model and go back to currency being issued as a national credit with the faith of the country behind it, not the Federal Reserve System we got in 1913. What, raise interest rates, write off the 1.5 quadrillion in fiat debt garbage we've been signed on to? I mean, are those good ideas? How about we start arresting these banking heads that admittedly sold trillions of dollars of fake instruments? I mean, it is truly us or them. As you said today on the radio, they are imploding our entire world into their own control, and we are going to see more riots, looting, things that actually just hurt the general public unless we reverse this system.
Well, my favorite idea is to arrest the bankers. And you have a great example of that with the 1980s, with Bill Black, the regulator at the time, who arrested and prosecuted more than 1,000 bankers, went to jail as a result of the savings and loan crisis. Now, everything is in place for a repeat of that event and to put these top bankers in jail for committing massive acts of financial fraud. And I think this would clean up the system. It would send a message to the public that looting is no longer tolerated, and it would be a great step forward. I mean, that's an obvious step. Now, why doesn't the Attorney General make that step? Why doesn't Barack Obama encourage that step? Because they're totally co-opted by the system. So the entire institutional approach, whether it's try to go after them on a legal basis or try to reinstitute sound money or try to support a candidate who supports sound money, like a Ron Paul, for example. I mean, those are great institutional approaches. None of them seem to be working because the institutions themselves are now completely broken and not working. So that leaves only two choices: civil disobedience or a violent reaction. Clearly, you would want a civil disobedience reaction. That's your first choice. And if you're trying to attack the banking system and you want to hit them where it hurts, I can think of a few ways. Number one, there could be a mass participation in a mass default on mortgages. This would destroy the banks and send a message. There could be a mass default on credit cards. There could be, in the UK, as we mentioned before, a boycott of the license fee to the BBC. The BBC has got to be held responsible for not reporting on the crime for the past 10 years. So those are the types of civil disobedience acts. And of course, on your show, going back to November of last year, we suggested people buy silver. It was 26. It's now over 40. And that has the double action of preserving your wealth as well as exposing banks on Wall Street to the liabilities of their short sale on silver. I saw a headline today on Drudge Report that talked about the fact that traders who were short gold, they sold short gold, they sold gold that they don't own, they are getting decimated. They are getting hammered They're suffering huge losses. That has to happen if the system will return to any kind of integrity.
And so it is that